"It's not supposed to be here," Caleb muttered under his breath as rain battered the deserted dock, every droplet a sharp slap against his weathered jacket. Streetlights flickered over the slick asphalt, reflecting pools of neon in the puddles that formed along the uneven pavement. A stroller sat abandoned near the edge of the pier, wheels half buried in mud, its canopy drenched and sagging under the weight of the relentless downpour. A German shepherd stood rigid in front of it, drenched fur plastered to its lean frame, amber eyes fixed like lanterns on anyone daring to approach. The wind carried the tang of salt from the nearby Columbia River, and the faint scent of wet wood and diesel from the docked boats mingled with it, sharp in Caleb's nostrils. His boots squelched in the rising water as he stepped closer, careful not to startle the dog, whose hackles were raised but not aggressively. The canine's tail tucked low, ears forward, muscles coiled like a spring ready to defend. Caleb had seen dogs like this before, trained for search and rescue, but something about the intensity in those eyes told him this was different. The rain blurred the lines between shadows and light, and in that gray wash, he caught the first hint of the stroller's secret. A small, quivering movement beneath the soaked blanket made his chest tighten. The dog's gaze never left the stroller, every once in a while flicking to Caleb as if assessing his intentions. He crouched slightly, hands raised and open, voice low but steady. "Easy, boy. I'm not here to take it from you." The German shepherd shifted slightly, then returned to its sentinel position, eyes unwavering. Caleb's mind raced as the storm whipped around him, recalling the missions in Afghanistan, the moments when he had been too late, the children he could not save, the bitter taste of helplessness that had lingered for years. But now, standing in the cold rain, he felt a different kind of responsibility pressing against his ribs. One small life lay beneath that blanket, and a bond had been forged without words, between him, the dog, and the fragile human life that depended on them both. His fingers brushed the wet fabric of the stroller hood, soaked through and cold, but beneath it, he glimpsed the faint outline of tiny fingers and the shallow rise and fall of a chest that fought against the chill. A whimper escaped from beneath the blanket, tiny but insistent, and the German shepherd stepped a fraction closer, nose low, growling softly, as if offering both warning and protection. Caleb inhaled the sharp, metallic scent of rain and wet earth, feeling the familiar tension of anticipation tighten in his shoulders. He spoke again, a whisper carried away by the wind. "You're safe? I've got you." The canine's ears flicked toward him, then back to the stroller, signaling trust but not submission. Caleb reached into his coat pocket, fingers brushing the cool metal of his dog tags, a reminder of vows and missions long past. He knelt beside the stroller, careful with each movement, and slowly lifted the edge of the blanket. The sight that met him made his heart lurch and muscles tense. A tiny infant, shivering, eyes closed, skin pale and damp, wrapped in nothing more than a thin cloth. Caleb's breaths came faster, but his voice remained calm. "I'm here. You're going to be okay." Atlas, the canine, circled closer, sniffing, body rigid, then lowered his head, placing it gently against the stroller as if reinforcing the circle of safety around the infant. The rain fell harder, tapping against the metal frame and the wet pavement, and Caleb could feel the weight of the storm pressing down, isolating them from the rest of the world. The dock was empty, the boats rocking silently, their horns muted by distance, and all that remained was the three of them, a Marine, a dog, and the fragile flicker of life beneath a sodden blanket. In that moment, time seemed suspended. The wind howled, the water gushed over the wooden planks, and yet the storm outside mattered little. Caleb lifted the stroller with deliberate care, Atlas stepping alongside, ears perked, muscles taut but patient. Every drop of rain soaked through his jacket, every gust of wind chilled his face, and still he moved forward, guided by instinct, memory, and an unspoken promise. The infant whimpered again, a soft sound that cut through the storm, and Caleb felt an unfamiliar surge of hope. Atlas's amber eyes met his, and in that silent exchange, Caleb understood that some missions never ended at the battlefield. Some rescues were meant to mend the unseen fractures of the heart, and sometimes the smallest miracles arrived not on wings, but on four wet paws, steadfast and unwavering. The rain had not let up, and Caleb kept the infant pressed close against his chest, feeling the faint warmth and shallow breath that wove between the cold gusts sweeping across the pier. Atlas walked beside him, wet fur dripping, tail low but alert, scanning every shadow as if the wind itself might carry danger. The storm had transformed the dock into a narrow river of water and mud, and every step Caleb took made a soft splash, a reminder of how fragile the moment was. He kept his eyes on the small figure in the stroller, careful not to jostle her, while Atlas circled slightly, nose to the ground, occasionally looking back to ensure Caleb was following the precise path the dog had chosen. The faint scent of the river mixed with wet timber and diesel, creating a sharp, almost metallic smell that clung to Caleb's jacket and filled his lungs. As they approached the old warehouse at the edge of the dock, a structure abandoned to the elements and shadowed by storm clouds, Caleb's eyes caught the dim glow of a single light inside. The door was ajar, swinging slowly on rusted hinges with each gust, the sound like a whisper through the storm. He stepped carefully over broken planks and puddles, Atlas following at a measured pace, muscles tense, every paw placement deliberate on the slippery wood. The warehouse smelled of wet concrete and mildew, a cold, stale odor mingled with the scent of rainwater seeping through gaps in the roof. Caleb could hear the faint drip of water, a steady rhythm that mirrored his own heartbeat. He set the stroller gently down on the slightly elevated wooden floor, lifting the infant out with one arm, tucking her head close to his shoulder. Atlas nudged the stroller with his nose, then stepped back, ears swiveling, attentive to the sound of distant waves crashing against the pilings and the occasional groan of the old structure. Caleb could feel the tension coiling inside him, years of discipline and experience sharpening his senses as he scanned the warehouse for any potential hazard. Though the only life he saw besides himself and Atlas was the tiny infant, trembling and wet but breathing. He wrapped the blanket tighter around her, pressing her to his chest, feeling the soft pulse of life against his ribcage, a fragile rhythm that reassured him with each rise and fall. Atlas lay down nearby, still vigilant, nostrils flaring slightly, watching the shadows as if he could anticipate threats before they arrived. Caleb took a deep breath, feeling the cold seep through his jacket, the wet fabric clinging to his skin, but his focus remained entirely on the infant and the dog. He whispered softly, words almost drowned by the rain and wind outside. "You are safe now. Just stay with me. I have you." The infant stirred slightly, a small whimper that cut through the ambient storm, and Atlas let out a low, steady exhalation, a comforting sound more than a warning. Caleb shifted his stance, adjusting his grip to support the infant's head and neck, noticing the tiny fingers curling instinctively around the edge of the blanket. The dog's ears flicked, and he gave a subtle nudge with his nose, reassuring Caleb and reinforcing the unspoken bond that had formed in the span of a few wet, tense minutes. Every shadow, every creak of the old wood, every gust of wind seemed amplified in the empty space, and Caleb's mind flashed back to times he had been too late, to missions where he had arrived moments after tragedy had struck. Yet here, in the thick storm and isolation, the weight of helplessness shifted slightly, replaced by a fragile hope, a chance to act and to protect. The light inside the warehouse seemed warmer than the storm outside, casting faint reflections on the wet surfaces, highlighting Atlas's sleek, dark coat and the tiny form in Caleb's arms. The Marine felt the familiar rhythm of his own breath, steadying himself, drawing from discipline and instinct, guiding each careful movement. Atlas shifted slightly, letting out a small, approving whine, nudging the stroller gently, as if confirming the path forward. Caleb smiled faintly under his soaked hood, taking in the sight of the steadfast dog and the vulnerable infant, realizing that survival in these moments was not just a matter of strength or skill, but of trust, attention, and the quiet, unwavering presence of someone, or something, watching over the smallest and most fragile life. He moved toward the back of the warehouse, where the floor sloped slightly upward, using Atlas's guidance to avoid the deeper puddles and broken boards, and felt a sense of cautious progress. The storm still raging, but the immediate danger muted within the sanctuary of the old building. Each step was deliberate, measured, a choreography of care, and as he reached a relatively dry corner near an old crate, he set the infant down gently, Atlas sitting immediately beside them, alert but calm, a sentinel in the dim, storm-soaked light. Caleb knelt, brushing water from the infant's damp hair, murmuring reassurances as he scanned the structure again, noting the secure walls and absence of movement beyond what they themselves created. The smell of wet wood and salt lingered in the air, mixing with the warmth emanating from the small body pressed against him. And for the first time since seeing the stroller, Caleb allowed himself to breathe with a hint of relief. Atlas rested his head near the infant, eyes flicking between Caleb and the soft rise and fall of the tiny chest, a silent promise that the storm, the cold, and the rain could not break the protective circle they had formed together. Outside, the wind tore at the building, the rain pounding like a relentless drum, yet inside, the rhythm of survival pulsed softly. A Marine, a dog, and the fragile, steadfast life that bound them in quiet trust, each presence reinforcing the other, creating a small, defiant haven in the midst of the relentless storm. Caleb worked with the careful silence of a man who knew panic could waste the few seconds mercy had given him. He eased the infant onto the driest stretch of canvas he could find, then peeled away the soaked outer blanket one fold at a time, each movement slow, each breath measured. The old warehouse groaned around them as rainwater ran down the cracked windows and slipped through seams in the roof, falling in steady drops that tapped the floor like a clock counting down. Atlas stayed close, his body angled between Caleb and the open doorway, but his eyes kept returning to the child with a focus so intense it seemed almost human. Caleb removed his jacket and wrapped it around the infant, tucking the heavy fabric beneath her tiny shoulders, trying to build a pocket of warmth against the cold. Her face was pale in the weak yellow light, her lips trembling, but her chest moved. Barely. Still enough. He pressed 2 fingers gently beneath her jaw, feeling for the flutter of a pulse, and when he found it, thin and fast as a bird wing, he closed his eyes for half a second. Not too late. Not yet. Atlas let out a soft sound, almost a plea, then nudged the side of the stroller again. Caleb glanced at him. The dog was not looking at the baby now. He was looking at the lower basket beneath the seat, where rainwater had gathered around a collapsed diaper bag and a bundle of cloth wedged against the metal frame. Caleb reached down and pulled the bag free. It was cheap blue canvas, soaked through, the zipper jammed with grit. Inside he found 2 unused diapers, a small bottle with only an ounce of formula left, a damp knit cap, and a folded photograph sealed poorly inside a plastic sandwich bag. The edges were wet. The image inside was blurred, but not completely gone. A young woman stood beside a hospital bed, tired but smiling, holding a newborn wrapped in pink. Beside her was a man in marine dress blues, one arm around her shoulders, his face younger than Caleb remembered, and smiling in a way Caleb had not seen since the desert. Caleb stared at the picture until the storm seemed to fall away. The man in the photograph was Corporal Nathan Miller. Nate, his radio operator. His friend, the brother who used to talk about opening a repair shop in Oregon, who carried peppermints in his pocket because he said war had enough bitter things in it. Caleb had not heard Nate laugh in 11 years, but suddenly he heard it as clearly as the rain on the roof. Atlas nudged the stroller again, harder this time, and Caleb forced himself back into the present. Beneath the photograph was a strip of hospital paper, softened by water but still readable in places. Hope Grace Miller. Female. 6 pounds, 9 ounces. Born in Portland, Oregon. Caleb swallowed. Hope. The name sat in the cold air like a candle flame. Then he found the note. It was folded into a square and tucked inside the plastic with the photograph, written in dark ink that had bled at the edges but had not vanished. His hands shook as he opened it. Find Sergeant Whitaker. Please. Nate said he would never leave someone behind. Caleb read the line once. Then again. His throat tightened so sharply he almost could not breathe. Atlas watched him, rain dripping from his muzzle, eyes steady and full of something Caleb could not name. Not accusation. Not fear. Recognition. Caleb whispered, "You knew." The dog stepped forward and lowered his head near the photograph, his nose touching Nate Miller's faded face with a gentleness that nearly undid the Marine completely. Caleb remembered Nate talking about his younger sister, Lily, a girl with a stubborn heart and a laugh that filled rooms. He remembered the way Nate had once said, "If anything ever happens to me, find someone who still knows what honor means." Caleb had thought it was just battlefield talk, the kind of thing men said when night was long and the world felt too uncertain. But here was the answer, years later, wrapped in rain, carried through darkness, guarded by a dog who refused to let strangers come close. Caleb looked down at Hope, her tiny hand curling weakly against the inside of his jacket. The sight cut straight through every wall he had built around himself. He had spent years believing the past was a locked door, something he could stand beside but never open. Yet the past had found him anyway. It had rolled up to a storm-drenched pier in a broken stroller, under a soaked blanket, with a child breathing softly against his chest and a German shepherd standing watch like heaven had posted him there. His phone showed no signal. The warehouse light flickered once, then steadied. Caleb lifted Hope carefully, holding her close beneath his chin, and felt her small breath warm the hollow of his neck. "All right, Hope," he whispered, voice rough but steady. "We are getting you out of here." Atlas rose before the words were finished. He moved to the doorway, looked into the wall of rain, then back at Caleb. Not waiting, leading. Caleb gathered the diaper bag, tucked the photograph and note into his shirt pocket, and stepped after him. Outside, the storm had grown louder, the street beyond the dock half hidden beneath sheets of water, but Atlas pointed his nose toward the hill road that climbed away from the harbor. Caleb knew that road. It led past the old lighthouse and toward the clinic that only opened during coastal emergencies. He had not taken that road in years. Not since the night he learned that some prayers arrived too late. Atlas barked once, sharp and certain, and Caleb tightened his arms around the child. The old wound in him stirred, but this time it did not stop his feet. This time, the mission was still breathing. The narrow road twisted sharply as Caleb followed Atlas through the sheets of rain, each step sending spray from the puddles onto his soaked jacket and the infant tucked against his chest. The headlights of his old Jeep barely cut through the mist, illuminating slick asphalt that reflected the gray clouds above like a second sky. Atlas led with precision, nose close to the ground, ears pricked forward, moving as if he knew every curve and pothole along the path better than any map could show. Caleb's hands tightened around the infant, feeling her faint warmth pulse against his chest, and he realized how fragile this life was, each breath a small miracle against the relentless storm. The wind whipped through the nearby trees, bending branches low, making shadows dance across the wet pavement, but Atlas moved with unwavering focus, a sentinel guiding them through chaos. Caleb thought of all the missions where timing had been everything, where a single second could mean the difference between survival and loss. And he felt that same acute awareness now, every sense alert, every muscle coiled in preparation for the unexpected. He glanced down at Atlas, noticing the way the dog's muscles shifted beneath the soaked fur, the subtle rhythm of his breathing syncing with Caleb's own heartbeat. The child stirred slightly, a weak whimper that cut through the wind, and Caleb whispered softly, "Hold on, little one, we are almost there." Atlas responded with a gentle nudge of the stroller, a reminder that their path was clear and that he would not abandon them. The road opened into a wider stretch near the old lighthouse, its white paint dulled by time and rain, the beacon long extinguished but still standing as a landmark in the storm. Caleb guided the Jeep to a stop beneath the sheltering overhang, Atlas moving ahead to sniff the ground and ensure the space was safe. Water pooled along the edges of the asphalt, and the wind tugged at the infant's wet blanket, but Caleb held her tighter, pressing her head against his shoulder, feeling the faint rise and fall of her chest as the tiny breaths reassured him that life persisted. The smell of wet pine and salt filled his lungs, mingling with the faint warmth of the engine and leather seats, grounding him amidst the chaos outside. He opened the glove compartment, pulling out a clean towel, and wrapped the infant gently, Atlas lying close by, head on paws, vigilant yet calm, ears flicking toward every sound of the storm. Caleb's mind raced with strategies for keeping the infant warm until he could reach medical help, remembering lessons from his years in the service, from cold nights and emergencies where every action mattered. Atlas rose, pacing slightly, sniffing at the edges of the Jeep, and Caleb followed his cue, knowing that the dog sensed the path forward better than any human could in this tempest. A faint light from the distant windows of the lighthouse keeper's cottage offered hope, a flicker of sanctuary, and Caleb adjusted his grip on the infant, rising carefully from the seat, and followed Atlas along the slick stone pathway that led to the steps. Each footfall was measured, careful not to slip, the child pressed against his chest, Atlas beside him, vigilant, their small trio moving with purpose through the pounding rain. The wind howled through the gaps in the stone wall, rattling shutters and doors, but inside the circle of safety formed by Caleb and Atlas, the infant remained protected, a fragile spark of life against the storm's fury. Caleb's heart tightened with gratitude and a twinge of awe as he thought of the dog, not merely an animal, but a guardian who had led them here with unwavering resolve, instincts honed through years of training and loyalty. The lighthouse cottage door opened, revealing a dimly lit interior, warm and dry, the scent of wood smoke and faint antiseptic reaching them as Caleb stepped inside, Atlas leading, body alert yet obedient, keeping the infant shielded from the cold. Every movement, every breath, every glance was deliberate, a choreography of care, the storm outside a relentless percussion against the walls, but inside, the warmth, the quiet, and the steadfast presence of Atlas and Caleb created a small haven, a place where life, fragile and precious, could hold on. Caleb set the infant gently on a padded cot, adjusting the blanket and pressing a hand lightly to her chest, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat beneath his fingers. Atlas lay down nearby, muzzle resting lightly against the edge of the cot, eyes never leaving the child, ears twitching at the faintest sound, alert to every nuance of movement in the room. Caleb exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly as he allowed himself a moment to appreciate the small miracle that had brought them here, the unbroken chain of care and vigilance that had guided them through the storm, proving that even in the darkest, wettest hours, life could endure and hope could persist. Caleb stayed crouched beside the infant, her tiny chest rising and falling in delicate rhythm beneath the layers of damp blankets he had gathered. The warmth of the small cot in the lighthouse cottage contrasted sharply with the cold, pounding rain outside, and every sound of the storm seemed distant and muted, filtered through the thick walls and shuttered windows. Atlas lay on the floor nearby, his amber eyes never leaving the child, nostrils flaring slightly as he inhaled the scents of the room, the rain, and the faint trace of the infant's perfume from her own soft skin and the blankets. Caleb's fingers traced the outline of her small hands, noticing the subtle movements as she flexed her fingers and let out the tiniest sigh, a sound that was almost swallowed by the patter of the storm. He shifted slightly, adjusting the blankets to create more warmth without disturbing the child's fragile comfort, feeling the steady weight of responsibility pressing against his chest, reminding him that this small life depended entirely on the care and attentiveness he could provide. Atlas lifted his head slightly, ears pivoting toward a distant creak in the lighthouse staircase, a sound of the wind pressing against loose boards, and Caleb understood that the dog was not merely protective, but also assessing, anticipating, coordinating silently with him as if they shared the same instinctive purpose. Caleb exhaled slowly, letting his breath warm the child's cheek, and thought of every long night spent in the field where timing and precision had been crucial, realizing that the smallest movement, the quietest sound, could be life-saving, just as it was now. He glanced down at the diaper bag, now set to the side, with the photograph and note still clutched in his mind, and gently retrieved a clean towel and a small bottle of warm water he had managed to keep from spilling, preparing to soothe the infant further. Atlas shifted, rising to his feet and moving around the cot in a careful circle, sniffing, and placing a soft paw near the blanket's edge as if ensuring nothing intruded on their fragile sanctuary. The wind rattled the shutters again, rain streaming down the windows in thick rivulets, but inside, the cot's warm surface, the infant's steady breaths, and the quiet vigilance of the dog created a cocoon of security. Caleb whispered softly, "We are going to keep you warm, keep you safe, and you will make it through the storm." And the words seemed to carry a weight beyond the simple promise, as if acknowledging that survival was not just a matter of shelter but of attention, presence, and unwavering commitment. Atlas lay down again, head resting lightly near the infant, occasionally lifting his ears at a sound of dripping water or a distant gust. Then returning to calm observation, Caleb gently lifted the infant's tiny feet, checking for color and warmth, adjusting the layers around her torso to ensure the most vulnerable areas were insulated, all the while feeling the dog's eyes on him, as if supervising, a silent partner in this delicate task of keeping life steady amidst the chaos of the storm. Time seemed to stretch, each second measured by the soft rise and fall of the infant's chest, the faint trickle of rain outside, and the steady, attentive breathing of Atlas, each contributing to the rhythm of survival. Caleb thought of how different the world felt within these walls, removed from the chaos and wet fury of the storm outside, and yet intimately connected to it through the presence of Atlas, who had guided them here, and the infant, whose fragile life was the center of this fragile balance. He adjusted the child once more, tucking the blankets securely around her shoulders and head, letting her cheek rest against the warmth of his chest, and Atlas shifted closer, placing his body as a shield and companion, their silent communication reinforcing the sanctuary they had formed. Caleb's mind wandered briefly to the photograph and note, to the story that had brought this infant into his arms, and to the silent, steadfast courage of the German shepherd who had refused to let her be alone in the storm. And he realized that in that precise moment, survival was not about rushing or frantic effort, but about patience, attentiveness, and the steady, quiet presence of those who refused to leave life unprotected. Each second that passed reinforced that understanding, as Atlas's eyes never left the child, and Caleb felt the slow, building relief of knowing that for now, she was safe, warm, and surrounded by beings who would not falter, creating a fragile, precious calm amidst the relentless night and storm outside. The night pressed on, and Caleb remained crouched near the cot, feeling the infant's fragile warmth pulse against his chest with every tiny breath, while Atlas lay beside them, body tense but steady, alert to every creak, drip, and whisper of wind that passed through the cracks in the lighthouse walls. The rain outside hammered the roof in relentless rhythm, each drop bouncing off the old shingles and pooling on the wooden floor in slow rivulets. Yet inside, a bubble of calm had formed around the trio. Caleb adjusted the blankets again, tucking them snugly under the infant's tiny shoulders and around her legs, mindful of every fold, every seam, knowing that even the smallest shift in warmth could make the difference. Atlas moved closer, resting his head lightly against the cot, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air, occasionally letting out a low, approving hum, as if acknowledging the infant's stability and reinforcing the protective circle he had established. Caleb glanced at the photograph and note tucked into his jacket pocket, the edges damp but still legible, and for a brief moment allowed his mind to wander to the life that had led the child here, the decisions and acts of care that had culminated in this precise alignment of fate and action. The infant stirred slightly, a soft, almost imperceptible movement, and Caleb whispered to her, "You are safe, and we will not let go," his voice low and steady, carrying both reassurance and the quiet weight of resolve. The light from the single lamp in the corner of the room flickered against the walls, illuminating Atlas's sleek coat, now glistening with water from the storm outside, highlighting the strength and vigilance in his stance. Caleb shifted slightly to check the infant's temperature, fingers brushing the damp blanket and the small curve of her shoulder, feeling the delicate rise and fall of her chest, and noted the subtle warmth returning to her tiny hands, a sign that their careful efforts were paying off. Atlas stood and moved to the doorway, pausing to sniff and then glance back at Caleb and the infant, as if ensuring the path remained secure, before returning to his position near the cot, forming an unbroken arc of protection. Caleb felt the tension in his shoulders ease slightly, the knowledge that the immediate danger had been navigated, allowing him a brief, precious moment of calm, though every sense remained alert to the storm's fury beyond the walls. He adjusted the blankets again, brushing strands of wet hair from the infant's forehead, and spoke softly, "We will make it through this, together," feeling the fragile life in his arms as a tether that anchored his own focus and resolve. The rain continued to pound, each gust of wind rattling the shuttered windows and sending shadows dancing across the walls, yet the room remained an oasis of warmth and care, defined by the quiet vigilance of Atlas and the steadfast attention of Caleb. He reached for the small bottle of warm water, ensuring it remained upright and ready should the infant require it. Every motion deliberate, every breath measured, aware that even the slightest disturbance could disrupt the delicate balance of comfort and security they had established. Atlas shifted once more, nudging the blanket gently with his nose as if testing its position, then settled, head resting near the infant's tiny feet, eyes flicking between Caleb and the child, an unspoken guardian maintaining the fragile harmony. Caleb allowed himself to exhale slowly, feeling the subtle rise and fall of the infant's chest against his hands, the gentle presence of Atlas at their side, and the comforting sense of continuity that even in the storm, life had found a way to endure. The distant sound of the waves crashing against the pier faded slightly as the wind moved, leaving only the rhythmic tapping of rain against the lighthouse roof, a backdrop to the fragile yet growing warmth and hope that filled the small room, connecting marine, dog, and infant in a quiet, unspoken bond of trust, care, and survival. Every second stretched, measured by the steady breaths of the child, the calm watchfulness of Atlas, and Caleb's attentive hands, weaving a fragile cocoon in which life could persist, resilient against the storm, sheltered by presence, devotion, and the quiet strength of loyalty unwavering in the face of relentless night. Atlas was the first to hear it. Caleb did not notice at first because his whole world had narrowed to the fragile rhythm beneath his fingertips, the soft rise of Hope Grace Miller's chest, the faint warmth returning beneath the blankets, the rain muttering against the old lighthouse glass. But Atlas lifted his head sharply, ears straight, body still, amber eyes fixed on the door as though the storm had spoken his name. A second later, a sound came from outside. Not thunder, not wood settling. Something smaller. A thin cry, almost swallowed by wind. Caleb froze. Hope stirred against his arm, her tiny mouth opening in a weak breath, and he looked toward Atlas, who was already on his feet. The German shepherd crossed the room in 3 quiet strides and pressed his nose to the lower edge of the door, then turned back to Caleb with a look so urgent it tightened the Marine's throat. Caleb whispered, "What is it, boy?" Atlas did not bark. He paced once, then nudged the stroller basket Caleb had dragged inside and left beside the wall. The old wheels squeaked softly. Rainwater still dripped from the fabric, forming a dark puddle on the wooden floor. Caleb stared at it, remembering the way Atlas had kept pushing at that basket back in the warehouse, not randomly, not out of fear, but with purpose. A chill moved through him that had nothing to do with the weather. He shifted Hope carefully onto the warmed cot, tucking his jacket around her so no cold air could reach her cheeks. "Stay with her," he told Atlas. But the dog gave a strained whine and pawed the stroller again. Caleb followed the motion, kneeling beside the soaked frame. The lower storage sling hung heavy, sagging beneath the weight of wet cloth, and something else hidden beneath a torn flap of vinyl. He reached inside and felt a small bundle wrapped in what had once been a dry towel. It moved. Barely. Caleb pulled it free with both hands, and his breath caught in his chest. Inside the towel lay a newborn German shepherd puppy, no bigger than both of his palms, its fur dark and slick from cold, its eyes sealed, its little body trembling so faintly he almost missed it. For a moment, the room lost all sound. The storm, the rain, even the wind seemed to fall behind a wall of silence. Atlas stepped forward with a sound so soft it hurt to hear, lowering his muzzle to the tiny bundle. He touched the puppy once, tenderly, then looked back to Hope on the cot. Caleb understood then. The dog had not only been guarding the baby, he had been guarding his own child too. 2 helpless lives had been hidden in that stroller. 2 breaths had been fighting the same cold. Caleb swallowed hard, feeling something inside him buckle. "Oh, Atlas," he whispered. "You carried both of them." The dog's eyes did not leave his face. There was no begging in them, only trust. The kind of trust that asked a man to do what he had once believed he could no longer do. Caleb moved quickly, but gently, wrapping the puppy inside the driest corner of his shirt and placing it near Hope, close enough to share warmth, but not so close that either small body would be crowded. Atlas climbed beside the cot without being told, careful and slow, then curved his body around both of them like a living wall. His wet fur steamed faintly in the warmer air, and his ribs moved with a deep, controlled breath. Caleb searched the cottage shelves and found a small emergency kit, 2 hand warmers, a clean dish towel, and an old battery lantern that flickered to life with a soft amber glow. He activated the hand warmers, wrapped them in cloth, and placed them near the blankets, never against skin, never rushing, each motion guided by calm hands and a heart that had begun to pound like distant drums. Hope made a small sound. The puppy answered with a whisper of movement. Caleb looked from one to the other, stunned by the fragile conversation between them, 2 souls too young to know the storm, yet stubborn enough to answer it. Then the front door opened against the wind with a hard groan, and Dr. Emily Carter stepped inside carrying a red medical bag, her raincoat shining under the lantern light, her dark hair tucked beneath a hood, her face pale from the cold but steady. She took in the scene in one breath. The Marine soaked to the skin, the infant on the cot, the German shepherd curled around her, and the newborn pup pressed in a towel beside them. "Caleb," she said quietly, because she knew him from veteran outreach clinics and coastal emergency calls. "What happened here?" Caleb looked down at Atlas, then at Hope, then at the puppy whose tiny paw moved once against the cloth. His voice came out rough and low. "Hey." Dog kept his promise longer than the storm could last. Emily crossed the room without another word. Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside the lighthouse cottage, the night had changed shape. It was no longer only a rescue. It was a choice, and Caleb could feel it waiting in the warm, trembling space between one child, one puppy, and the dog who refused to leave either behind. The storm seemed to hold its breath as Caleb knelt beside the cot, the infant and puppy nestled safely under layers of blankets and the warmth of his jacket. Atlas lay close, his body curved protectively around them, amber eyes sharp yet calm, observing every shadow that flickered across the lighthouse walls. The rain had shifted, a steady drizzle now, but the wind still pressed against the shuttered windows with intermittent gusts, rattling the panes in a rhythm that mirrored Caleb's own heartbeat. He felt the weight of the night, the cold soaked into his bones, yet the small pulse of life beneath his hands and the quiet assurance of Atlas beside him created a pocket of warmth and focus that held him steady. He shifted slightly, brushing damp hair from the infant's forehead, whispering words only the room could hear. "Hold on. We are here now. You are not alone." The puppy moved faintly under the cloth, a tiny whine that blended with the soft whimper of Hope Grace Miller, and Caleb's fingers tightened around the blankets, drawing them closer without restricting their fragile movements. He surveyed the small cottage, noting the way the lamps light through long shadows across the wooden floor, highlighting the dog's dark coat and the sheen of water on the infant's skin. Every sound from outside, the slap of rain, the occasional gust, the distant crash of waves against the pier, seemed magnified and yet insignificant in the presence of the quiet life and unwavering vigilance within the room. Caleb placed a hand gently on Atlas's shoulder, feeling the warmth and reassurance radiating from the dog, a silent partner in this delicate vigil. He reached for the medical kit he had set aside earlier, checking the hand warmers and cloths, placing them strategically near the blankets to sustain warmth without touching skin directly. Atlas shifted, standing for a moment, circling the cot, sniffing the blankets and the air, then settling again with his head near the infant's tiny feet, eyes flicking between Caleb and the small forms, maintaining a perimeter of care and quiet command. Caleb felt a moment of clarity, understanding that the storm outside was not the threat. It was the absence of attention, the lapse in watchfulness, that could have cost them. He whispered once more, gently, steadily, allowing his voice to anchor both himself and the fragile life against the storm. "Breathe, just breathe. We are with you." The infant responded with a faint shiver, and the puppy twitched slightly under the towel, a gentle signal that their fragile lives were persevering. Caleb adjusted the blankets once more, pressing lightly to ensure warmth and comfort, his eyes scanning the room for any potential danger while also absorbing the miracle of survival before him. Atlas shifted again, moving closer to the infant's head, his wet fur a comforting barrier against the cold, and Caleb placed a hand atop the dog's head, feeling the steady warmth, the calm breath, and the presence of unwavering loyalty. Each second stretched, measured by the rhythm of breathing, the soft sounds of life, the tapping rain, and the protective stance of Atlas. Caleb's thoughts flicked briefly to the photograph and note tucked in his jacket. Reminders of the connection and trust that had led the infant to him. A chain of care extended through years and miles and storms. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing gently, insistently, and yet with it, a rising sense of hope, fragile and persistent, that these lives had been delivered safely through vigilance, attention, and the quiet courage of a steadfast companion. Outside, the lighthouse rocked slightly under the wind, rain sluicing down the walls, yet within, the warmth, the breathing, and the silent guardianship formed a circle unbroken by storm, a sanctuary crafted from patience, presence, and the shared instinct to protect what was most precious. Caleb adjusted the infant one last time, the puppy nestled against her side, Atlas's body forming a shield around them, and he allowed himself a long, steady breath, feeling the small, precious miracle of survival settle gently into the night. The storm outside a distant roar compared to the quiet pulse of life, trust, and unwavering loyalty that filled the room. Emily Carter moved with the calm urgency of someone who understood that mercy often worked through steady hands. She laid her red medical bag beside the cot, snapped on a small battery-powered warmer, and leaned close to Hope Grace Miller, listening to the faint breath that came and went like a candle trying to survive in a draft. Caleb stood beside her, soaked, exhausted, hands trembling only when he thought no one could see. Atlas had not moved from his place. The German shepherd lay curved around the infant and the puppy, his wet body giving off the last of its warmth, his amber eyes fixed on Emily, as if he were asking her to understand the order of his heart. Save them both. Emily touched Hope's cheek, then the tiny puppy wrapped in the towel. Her expression tightened, not with fear, but with the weight of truth. They are both very cold, she said softly. The baby needs the warmer first. Caleb looked at the puppy, then at Atlas. The dog did not growl. He did not protest. He lowered his head and nudged the towel closer to Hope's blanket, as if surrendering every part of himself to the smallest chance of life. That was the moment Caleb felt something old inside him break open. Not in pain, in recognition. Years ago, in a place full of dust and sirens, he had learned what it meant to choose under pressure, and he had carried the ache of that choice like a stone beneath his ribs. But Atlas did not choose one life over another. He simply made a circle big enough for both. Emily placed the warmer near Hope, wrapped the puppy in dry cloth, and handed the small bundle to Caleb. "Hold him against your chest," she said. "Your body heat may be enough." Caleb slipped the puppy inside his shirt, against his skin, feeling the tiny cold weight settle over his heart. He drew in a breath that shook. "Come on, little Marine," he whispered. "You have made it this far." Outside, the wind struck the lighthouse cottage so hard the window panes rattled in their frames. The lantern flickered. Hope's breathing faltered. Emily went still for one sharp second, then bent lower, counting, listening, guiding warmth and air with careful, practiced patience. Caleb watched the infant's face, the tiny mouth, the small closed eyes, and the room narrowed until there was nothing left but the space between one breath and the next. Atlas lifted his head. A low whine rose from his chest. Hope did not move. Emily whispered, "Caleb." It was not a surrender. It was a warning, the kind that arrives when time becomes thin. Caleb stepped forward, his voice low, almost broken. "No, not this one." He placed 2 fingers gently near Hope's tiny hand and began speaking to her, not loudly, not frantically, but with the steady command he had once used to guide frightened young Marines through darkness. "Hope, listen to me. You are not alone. Alice brought you here. Your mother sent you here. Nate sent you here. So you stay." The names seemed to warm the room. Nate. The photograph in Caleb's pocket. The promise in the note. The past standing beside the present, asking to be redeemed. Atlas rose, slow and careful, then placed his muzzle near Hope's blanket. He exhaled a warm breath across the edge of the cloth, then stayed there, still as prayer. The puppy against Caleb's chest gave the smallest twitch. Caleb felt it and closed his eyes. "That is it," he whispered. "Both of you. Stay." For 3 seconds, the cottage held no sound except rain. Then Hope made a noise so small it barely belonged to the world. A thin cry. Weak. Uneven. Alive. Emily's shoulders dropped as she let out the breath she had been holding, and her eyes filled with quiet tears she did not wipe away. Caleb bent over the cot, one hand covering his mouth, the other still protecting the puppy against his chest. Atlas gave one soft bark, not loud, not wild, but full of recognition, as if he had heard the answer before anyone else. Then the puppy moved again, a tiny paw pressing against Caleb's skin. Caleb laughed once, breathless and stunned, the sound breaking through years of silence inside him. By dawn, the storm had softened to mist. Red and white emergency lights glowed faintly through the gray morning outside the lighthouse road, and Officer Daniel Hayes arrived with paramedics and a search team. They found Lily Miller alive near the lower service road, cold and frightened but safe, sheltered beneath the overhang of an old bait shop after her car had slid off the flooded lane. She wept when she saw Hope wrapped warm in Emily's arms. She wept harder when Caleb placed Nate's photograph beside her hand. No one needed many words. Some truths enter a room quietly and sit down with the living. Atlas stood beside Caleb as the paramedics carried Hope toward the ambulance, and for the first time all night, the dog's body relaxed. The puppy, now wrapped in a clean towel, slept in the crook of Caleb's arm, breathing in tiny, stubborn waves. Lily looked at Atlas and whispered he would not leave her. Caleb touched the German shepherd's wet head, feeling the solid warmth beneath his palm. No, he said. He would not leave anyone. Weeks later, when the rain had passed into memory and the Oregon coast shone beneath a pale winter sun, Hope slept safely in a white bassinet near the window of Lily's small home. The puppy, named Harbor, fit inside Caleb's old Marine cap and snored softly beneath the table. Atlas lay beside the door, ears relaxed, eyes half closed, still guarding, though there was nothing left to fear. Caleb came by every morning with coffee for Lily, formula from the store, and a quiet smile that no longer looked like an apology. He never called it a miracle in front of many people. He only looked at the child, the puppy, and the old K9 who had stood through rain with a promise no storm could wash away, and he understood that